Good morning, everybody. It's your favorite aspiring revolutionary here, a wandering author, reminding you that we are all the authors of our own lives. As always, my message remains the same: spend less, live more, earn your freedom with frugality. And today we are going to go over chapter 9 of The Wealth of Nations, which is on the profit of stocks, or the profits of stock. Now, before we begin, it's important to clarify what Smith means here when he says stocks. It could include like the stock of a company and the profit that you make on that, but he actually has a broader definition that would be more analogous to something like capital requirements or capital gains or something like that. So just keep that in mind when you hear the word profit. It's really a bit broader than what we think of nowadays when we hear the word. Last time, in Chapter 8, we went over the forces that govern the rates of wages, how they rise and fall in accordance with the increasing and decreasing wealth of society. So profits rise and fall because of the same forces that govern the rate of wages, increasing and decreasing wealth in a society. However, the two are affected quite differently. The elevation of material stocks typically improve wages, but they tend to lower profits. When many merchants are well supplied and in the same trade, their natural competition diminishes their profit. As a material surplus affects society as a whole, profits tend to decline in the same way. During Smith's time, the rate of profit in a given industry was even more difficult to ascertain than the rate of wages. Remember, they didn't have a census bureau that collected all the data we have nowadays. So even business owners could rarely tell you their profit themselves, as it fluctuated according to the cost of commodities and the fortune of his rivals and customers. We can calculate how much people made in profit indirectly by examining the interest rates, though. Where people can earn a ton by the use of money, they will be willing to pay a ton for the use of it. From the time of Henry VIII to Queen Anne, financial regulations dropped interest rates from 10% to 5% in English society. These regulations appear to have followed and not led the prevailing market rates. At that time, the wealth of the kingdom had been advancing at an accelerating rate, and the wages of workers continually increased. Capital requirements tend to be larger as the size of a city grows. The large sums employed and numerous competitors available in a sizable city pushes down the rate of profit in every branch of trade. However, the cost of labor raises in correspondence with the city's size. Venture capitalists may have sufficient capital to fund their enterprise, but they can struggle to find the hands to work it. Therefore, they must bid against one another, raising wages and lowering profit. Sparsely populated countries, on the other hand, encounter the opposite challenge, with not enough stock to employ all the workers. In Smith's time, Scotland saw much higher interest rates compared to England, and Scottish enterprise was less costly as a result. Businesses could generate a larger profit in the Highlands, as their wages were lower than in England. France's economy experienced the same effects, and their interest rates were also higher in comparison to what the English paid. French laborers also worked for less than the English ones. And England's entrepreneurs often sought to establish business there because of the great promise of profits. Holland, on the other hand, again, was even richer than England. Their government borrowed at 2%, and private people with good credit could borrow at 3%. Wages also were higher in Holland than England. Remember, they had a great trading empire back then, so they were even wealthier than the English. Even though some complained that trade was diminishing in Holland, it was diminishing profit that aggravated the merchant class. Not the fact that trade itself was diminishing, but rather how much they could make off the trade. As Smith says, the diminution of profit is the natural result of prosperity, and of greater stocks being deployed than before. Holland was notorious for lending to other nations, where the interest rates were higher, and Adam Smith believed this evidenced a startling trend. When enough capital accumulates in a nation, it may no longer be sufficiently profitable for them to use it at home. Circumstances differed in the new colonies, where there were both high rates of wages and profits simultaneously. A new colony will be understocked compared to the extent of its territory. They will even lack the people to utilize all the land. So what they have only gets used in the most fertile areas. These lands are purchased at prices below their natural produce, and any stock utilized in these endeavors yields substantial profit. As a consequence, they can afford to pay elevated interest rates. Such rapid profits enable farmers to hire more hands than can be found, so he rewards those available quite liberally. Remember, whenever there's more work to be done than workers than can be found, it naturally pushes up the rate of wages. Growing colonies see the rate of profit diminish. All the most fertile land will have been occupied. after a time, and less is garnered from the remaining plots. Then, less interest can be afforded by the owners. Interest rates in the colony dropped over the course of time as a result. However, wages do not follow profits on this downward slope, as the demand for laborers increases as stock accumulates, no matter its profit. After this diminishes, stock may accelerate its growth. Great stocks with low profits still build faster than small stocks with large profits. Remember, $1 million at 10% grows quickly or quicker than $10,000 would at 30%. Money makes money. Exploring new territory or opening new avenues of trade, like the development of social media or artificial intelligence today, can raise stocks' profit in many cases. Interest rates also will rise, even in a country undergoing rapid expansion. The country's stock will be supplied to these new areas, the ones which afford the greatest profit. Resources will then be taken from previous industries and turned to the new ones. In the old trades, competition will lessen, and the market starts to supply fewer goods. Then, the price of commodities will increase along with their profits. Everyone can afford to pay more interest, so rates follow the trend. The United Kingdom saw old industries depleted by the new colonies, and competition dropped, increasing profit. Wages lowered, and this decreased the cost to produce for industrialists. They were able to lower the cost of production while increasing the price of what they sold. Since it was less expensive to create goods, and they sold for more, profits rose. Bengal had great fortunes for the British to acquire, and they paid the land workers incredibly low wages in the East Indies. Farmers would borrow the funds to till the land at 40 to 60% interest, and this would eat up the majority of any profit. Enormous usury of this kind was also seen in the late Roman Republic under the reign of Brutus, who lent to Cyprus at 84%. Countries with a full complement of riches, what we might call a fully developed nation, who have developed to the fullest extent of their land and were not receding in their development, produced low rates of profits and wages. When there are enough people to fully man every industry, employment competition would be at such a level that wages would reduce, and it would be difficult to expand industries so they could employ more people. Ordinary rates of profit would fall to the lowest levels as a result. Smith believed no culture had yet risen to that degree of opulence, and in his time, China was described as having long been stationary. He thought this was the result of them acquiring the fullest extent of riches possible under their laws and customs. However, he noted that other laws could enrich a culture further than theirs. For example, nations that abhor foreign trade could never develop business to the same size as an international culture. Countries that protect the wealth of the rich would see a very secure upper class at the expense of the poor and industrious. The pretense of justice would allow them to be plundered, as monopolies develop and amass all trade into the hands of a few, who would enjoy massive profits. Legal defects, at times, may elevate interest rates above a nation's condition. If laws fail to enforce contracts, borrowers are equated with the bankrupt and those of dubious credit. Uncertainty then forces lenders to establish usurious rates to better protect their investments. This happened in the barbarous nations, who overthrew the Roman Empire and left contract law in the hands of the people for long centuries. Their courts and kings hardly touched the topic, and they experienced high interest rates as a result. If someone just decided not to pay their contracts, they didn't have like a credit reporting agency back then. And if laws prevent interest altogether, people will still lend at interest. However, they will take great care to evade the law and do their lending in private. Since it becomes more difficult to lend, interest rates actually increase in these circumstances, even though they are outlawed. Even the lowest rates of profit must be enough to cover the occasional loss incurred by a business. The surplus above this is their net profit, and compared to gross profit, it can be much smaller. Interest rates must be proportional to the net profit rather than the gross. Otherwise, enterprise could not afford to make steady payments. In fully developed nations, you will see incredibly small rates of profit, and the usual market rate of interest is reduced in consequence. All but the wealthiest are unable to live off the interest of their money in these places, kind of like the U.S. today. The lower and middle classes must continue to ply their trades to make a living. Holland, in Smith's time, was near these levels of development when The Wealth of Nations was written, and it was against popular culture to be unemployed there. To enjoy the highest rate of profit, commodities must be priced so as to consume the majority of land's rent while also paying workers the barest subsistence wages. Workers must be fed, but landlords do not always have to be paid. The East India Company pursued a policy similar to this in Bengal. Now, the ratio between market interest rates and ordinary net profit can vary. In Great Britain, back then, earning double the regular rate of interest would have been considered a reasonable return on investment. So if they were paying 5%, they might look to make a profit of 10% total. Smith believed that in countries with higher interest rates, say at 10%, half of a business's profit could go to paying interest if they operated using borrowed money. The ratio could be different in places with much higher or lower rates. Rapidly developing nations may have low profit rates and cheap commodities, so they can afford to compensate high-earning workers. High profits tend to rise wages. Although prices rise arithmetically in concern with wages, while rising geometrically in concern to profits. In other words, increased prices act like simple interest, while wages act like compound interest in relation to profit. Smith said merchants would often complain about the effect of high wages on prices, while ignoring the even more deleterious effect of high profits on them. They would only complain about the others. So, paying people more does increase the cost of how much it takes to produce something, but having a greater profit increases the cost exponentially.